Paul George has just signed a 4-year, over $200 million contract to join the Philadelphia 76ers, forming a big three with Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey, and this could potentially stir the pot in the Eastern Conference in a really interesting way. Hello everybody, welcome to Awesome Rusty Buckets. If you're over on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and give the video a like. We are trying to hit 200k subscribers by the end of the year, so that is much appreciated. Also, go ahead and check us out on Spotify if you have not yet, and give us a follow and a 5-star review there as well. One more quick promo: the newest main channel video, which I realize, holy shit, it's been a long time, that is going to be out pretty much immediately after this video goes up, or maybe even beforehand, depending on how the timing works out. Be on the lookout for that. It is about the finals and how they have kind of not been as great the last couple of years and why that is. So that will be linked to the description as soon as it's available. So we're going to talk about this Paul George deal, but we're also going to go over some of the smaller moves that have happened because they're still relevant. But first things first, let's talk about what Paul George to the Sixers means for the Sixers. Well, actually, the first thing that's actually pretty interesting to me about this whole thing is that this was a free agent signing of a top tier player. No trade involved. These days, either you re-sign to a team and you stay with that team, or you're re-signed to that team with the intention of being traded somewhere else. And the reason for that is typically that the team that you're coming from can give you a little bit more money, so you're kind of circumventing the cap in a way, getting that extra money from that team to go somewhere else. But Paul George did not do that with the Clippers. He declined his player option, which I believe made this ineligible if he didn't just re-sign back immediately, and it became pretty clear that he was not going to be sticking with the Clippers. But he's in Philly now, and this was really exactly what the Sixers were looking to do this offseason, and I thought it was really silly that a lot of people were hitting the panic button after they lost to the Knicks this year when they had this much cap space going into the offseason. Now, I understand that, you know, as I just mentioned, getting these big free agent names isn't even really a thing that happens in NBA culture anymore. However, here we are, and it has, and I think there's very good reason to believe that the Sixers can come back and be the best version of this team that we have seen in the Joel Embiid era. I understand there are some concerns about Paul George's age. There's also some concerns about the fact that they gave him $50 million a year given that age. However, a 4-year contract is not necessarily all that detrimental. I imagine Paul will still be an all-star caliber player for at least the next 2 seasons to justify that contract to some degree. And then, hey, if you have $50 million and you'd really rather be paying the guy $30 million and it just sucks for 2 years, well, guess what? You already did that with Tobias Harris. So what's 2 years more? That said, Paul George, it's well known, he's a plug-and-play player for pretty much any NBA team. He's a phenomenal off-ball guy. He's a great perimeter defender, and he does have some on-ball creation, but not in a way that, you know, overall interrupts the flow of the offense. That happens occasionally, as it does with any player who's creating, but generally he has a pretty good idea of when he should or should not be aggressive in terms of looking for his own shot. Otherwise, you're primarily going to be seeing him as an off-ball guy with this team. Tyrese Maxey will be taking the lead ball handling duties. Obviously, Embiid will be having a lot of time in the mid-post with the ball in his hands making decisions. So Paul George is going to be coming off of screens, probably going to have some handoff action with Embiid because he, of course, had that really infamously great 2-man game with JJ Redick. Paul George provides even more options off of that set. If the defender steps up a little bit, he can blow by and get to the rim a lot better than JJ Redick can. Or just hit a tough contested mid-range shot because he is much taller. Either way it goes, should be a great fit in that regard. Tyrese Maxey with him on the floor alleviates some pressure. There's definitely been times, especially given the history of Joel Embiid getting hurt, where Tyrese Maxey just simply has to do too much. And, you know, there was this stretch this year after Embiid got hurt to close the season that kind of caused him not to win the MVP award. Not even kinda, definitely. Maxey had to do a lot, and he did fine under that situation, but if he had Paul George by his side, would have made life a whole lot easier. So on that front, big deal. Across the board, though, I'm trying to see the negative on this one. The only real negative is if Paul George ages bad, but I really don't think that he's going to. I think he started to show signs of age these last couple of years, but not to some significant degree. And even when he's still doing that, he's still putting up good numbers. Defensively, he's not quite, DPOY candidate in 2018, 2019, whatever it was that Paul George was that year, but he is still a good defender. Probably not all defense anymore, but maybe if he locks in and focuses his energy on that, that is indeed doable. It's worth mentioning that for the Clippers, while yes, he was the second option more often than not, and then the third option even more so when James Harden was there, at least in terms of usage percentage, he was often the second most important player and often the most important player because Kawhi Leonard was constantly getting hurt and James Harden only just got there recently. Now, sure, there will be moments where Paul George is the most important player for Philly, but I feel like Tyrese Maxey is otherwise pretty much an Iron Man, so you're almost always only going to have him be your second best player at worst, and then, Joel Embiid, as insane as it is actually a little bit less injury prone than Kawhi Leonard tends to be. Kawhi played like 70 games this year. It felt like a fucking miracle, but otherwise constantly out, constantly rehabbing injuries, and Paul George is having to shoulder the load offensively as a result of that. That stressor doesn't really exist for him anymore, so it's a good move for Paul George on that front. There was some rumors about him going to the Golden State Warriors, even the Orlando Magic, which I was like, yeah, that's not gonna fucking happen. And dude, I appreciate that NBA nerds are NBA nerds and they like funky moves happening, but the fact that I saw so many people rooting for him to go to Orlando, respectfully, no thanks. Philadelphia, I think, can possibly be the best team in the East. I still am giving Boston that benefit of the doubt, as I pretty much will always with a repeat champion that we have no reason to believe that they're going to fall off. Across the board, great move for the Sixers. Love it for them. I think them and the Knicks could actually, if healthy, pose a genuine threat to the Celtics and make the Eastern Conference playoffs next year a whole lot more interesting than they were this year. Hopefully, injuries don't ruin all of what I just said. Now let's talk about what this means for the Clippers, because the Clippers just brought back Kawhi Leonard and James Harden on contract extensions, and it's kind of up in the air what exactly their future is going to look like. Are they going to try and move those guys because they don't have their own draft picks? And I don't imagine OKC is particularly interested in making that swap because they have their draft picks from the SGA for Paul George trade all the way back in the day. That's another thing that's affecting this whole result, is that OKC at the peak of their powers might be getting some high lottery picks, because even if you bring back Kawhi and Harden, and even if you sign like a DeMar DeRozan, for example, which is an idea that's been thrown out there, I see no reason to believe that this team will be any better than a play-in team unless Kawhi Leonard manages to continue to replicate playing 70 games a season, and I just don't know if that's realistic. So on that front, probably a bad spot to be in if you're the Clippers. Not abnormal for the Clippers to be in a bad spot, but it's pretty ugly, man. This is kind of something we knew would inevitably happen if they didn't end up getting a title out of this core, because to be honest, they did what I always say you should do, which is when you feel that you are a contender, you need to go all in. You need to put all your chips on black. And if that doesn't work, sucks to suck, but that's just what has to happen. Well, now we're at the sucks to suck stage for the Clippers. It's gonna suck. There's no other way to put it. They don't really have anything as far as young assets. I know Terrence Mann was kind of a young asset like 3 years ago. I feel like he's 27, 28 now. So across the board, there's not much upside here. Don't have your draft picks. All your money is invested in old injury-prone players, especially Kawhi. I don't even think you really have salary cap, because you were going to bring back Paul George on his bird rights, not based on just having the cap room. So I don't really know what the fuck they do. There is not a lot that I can think of to dig them out of this hole. I mean, trading Kawhi and James Harden would be a start towards a rebuild, but if the next couple of seasons, you have to worry about your draft picks going to other teams, then you're in the same situation the Brooklyn Nets have been in the last 2 years, where it's like, yeah, we're not gonna fucking blow it up. Why would we blow it up? We don't get our draft pick for it. There's no incentive to be bad on purpose. So the Clippers don't have incentive to be bad on purpose, but they don't have the talent to be good on purpose. They're probably gonna be stuck in the middle. They might be a play-in tier team, but the Western Conference is a bitch. I would say the Clippers could make the playoffs in the East, not so much feeling that way about the West. So for the Clippers end of this, it's pretty ugly. Don't know what you do. I don't think DeMar DeRozan is a solution. Paul George's ability to space the floor, be a point of attack defender, pay more attention to that aspect of the game and not so much on the on-ball creation. DeMar DeRozan is a mid-range shot creator who is a good playmaker but needs the ball in his hands a lot, doesn't really have much off-ball game to him. Just in general, the fit's bad. Like, him and Kawhi Leonard like to operate in the same areas of the floor. It would be funny to see him and Kawhi together, given the connection those two have, having been traded for each other, of course. I just don't really find that to be a solution. It's really just kind of a desperate power grab to be like, yeah, this guy is a name. Hopefully that means we can replace the name we just lost. But the thing is, it's not just a name. It's the fit. You have one of the greatest 3-and-D players who have ever graced this game in Paul George, and then you have a mid-range shot creator. And those are two very different players with two very different abilities that fit very differently in this team. So the Clippers are fucked, and the Sixers are doing great. And I just want to say to all those people who are like, it's over for the Sixers, I was saying it from the beginning, that shit was stupid. It was incredibly dumb to be hitting the panic button knowing that they intentionally structured the roster this year so that they would have a lot of money to spend in free agency. Here we are now. They have a third star. They have a third star who fits perfectly alongside their other 2 stars, which is exactly what you need from a third star. I'm often anti-third star, but in the case of a Paul George type of player, that's the perfect third star player to have, because he more or less fits into a role player type of role. He just does that role, being an off-ball shooter at an excessively great rate. So Paul George, fantastic move for the Sixers. A+ as far as I'm concerned, maybe an A- just given the contract. It's a little scary, but also given the bags that we're seeing get thrown around, like Emmanuel Quickley just got $35 million a year from the Raptors. $50 million ain't really going to be shit in 4 years. It's not really going to be shit in 2 years even. There are players who are starting to sign extensions that are in the 60 millions, and I believe Giannis's most recent extension in the last year even gets to 71 million. I think the Sixers will be fine. I think in general people overreact to contract size, like people were doing that with the OG move. They're also overreacting to the trade for Mikal Bridges. It's about the bigger picture here, and I do think that people act like that negative asset is far more detrimental than it is. Even with how many big contracts there are so many players making a decent chunk of money that one bad contract is not going to ruin the rest of your team. Now, multiple bad contracts is another story, but I don't really think there are many teams in that situation. James Harden is making $35 million on his extension. That's far from a bad contract. I think that's actually pretty excellent for what he brings to the table at this stage of his career. Kawhi Leonard could be a bad contract if he's constantly hurt and the team's not even good to begin with, and you're not even, going, yeah, we're paying him a lot, but if he's here for the playoffs, we can go on a title run. No, you can't. That dream is over. And unless you somehow find a player that can replicate Paul George's skill set, you're fucked. Let's move on to some of these smaller... Oh, hello. The Bulls trading for Josh Giddey was the final straw for DeMar DeRozan, and he is no longer looking to stay with the Bulls. A source told the Sun's Time last Sunday night that the Alex Caruso-Josh Giddey trade was the final straw for DeRozan's mind for any sort of return. As a 34-year-old, he will now use free agency to shop elsewhere. Let's fucking go. Thank God. That was the one positive takeaway I had for the Josh Giddey trade, was like, this could be a sign of the tide shifting. Like, you probably make this move with the intention of rebuilding. And if DeMar DeRozan's forcing his way out, then you're definitely rebuilding, because that's the only reason why you're any fucking good to begin with. So DeMar DeRozan's probably going to the Clippers. If he's not, he's probably going to some other LA team. Just to skim down the timeline from Adrian Wojnarowski, the Miami Heat signed Delon Wright the Milwaukee Bucks signed Delon Wright to a 1-year, $3.3 million deal. That is a really good signing as far as I'm concerned. Delon is a strong point of attack defender, and he's a solid enough offensive player to the point where you feel comfortable having him in a playoff rotation. And for $3.3 million a year to have that type of guy, that is an absolute steal. And point of attack defense is obviously what Milwaukee needs, so great move there. The Detroit Pistons, everybody saw this coming like a month into the season, arguably before the season even started. I guess Nick could tell you.
I got a 2-month-old asleep right here. I finally got him to fall asleep so I could edit Jacob's video. And then I get halfway into the video and he's asking me to do content. He wants me to quantify how long have we as Pistons fans been like, hey, this Tobias Harris guy, like, keep a fucking eye on him. Trying not to raise my voice. I'm fucking furious right now. Hey, while you're taking care of your 2-month-old, while you're alone for 10 hours taking care of your 2-month-old, by the way, not 2 years, 2-month-old, try not to raise my voice. Jacob's like, do content? We were like, Tobias Harris is probably going to be a fucking Piston before the season started, for sure.
But I really started to see that noise as this season went along because of how fucking awful Tobias Harris was for the Sixers throughout the year. 2 years, $52 million a year. As much as Tobias Harris does kind of suck, he is competent in a couple of areas that the Detroit Pistons could use. He spaces the floor at an all right level, has some ability to create his own shot, but doesn't necessarily need the ball in his hands. All the guys on the team seem to need the ball in their hands to score. Tobias Harris really ain't that, so that's a nice thing to have. I think he could develop some good chemistry with Cade Cunningham. You know, for $26 million a year, 2 years, I think it's fine. You know, I don't really think it's a reason to act like, oh my God, they went all in on Tobias Harris. They gave him a decent deal. They gave him decent money. It's nothing to write home about, positively or negatively. Holy shit, dudes are getting paid these days. Isaiah Hartenstein just signed a 3-year, nearly $90 million deal with the OKC Thunder, so just under 30 a year. Man, that is crazy. I just have to contextualize that sometimes in my head because players are getting paid more and more. But this one and the Emmanuel Quickley deal, I was like, oh, yeah, right. We're in this territory where not even a top 50 player in the league is going to be making 30 mil. Crazy shit. NBA players are more blessed now than they've ever been. But Isaiah Hartenstein to the Thunder, pretty great move. I think he makes a lot of sense for them. He gets to maybe not necessarily always be playing that 5 spot. Maybe he comes off of the bench at points. He provides a big body, a rebounder, a great offensive rebounder, a good finisher, an excellent decision maker. Isaiah Hartenstein makes great decisions with the ball in his hands. Just across the board, really talented center. He really rounds out that rotation. You know, you put J-Dub out there. I would go with Isaiah Joe as the other starter, but they're probably going to go with Lou Dort. And then you do Chet and then Isaiah. Huge body in the paint. Chet is free to be more free safety defensively and not have to worry as much about his weakness, which is weakness, not being a very strong body. Isaiah can handle those matchups. He doesn't have to match up with Joel Embiid anymore. I like this move a lot. I think this is going to end up being one of the bigger, more impactful moves of this offseason in a way that's fairly slept on. Let's talk about, and this is crazy because I can't believe I'm saying this, let's talk about a good decision that the Chicago Bulls made. Jalen Smith, he has agreed to a 3-year, $27 million contract with the Chicago Bulls. I love this deal. Jalen Smith is a player who I have been saying is essentially the most underrated player on the Indiana Pacers. Didn't end up cracking the playoff rotation pretty much at all. And even when he did, he hit his shots, but he wasn't actually getting opportunity like that. Like the one game that he played real minutes against the Knicks, he went 2 for 2, 7 points, got subbed out immediately. But in the regular season, in 17 minutes of action, he averaged 10 points, 5.5 rebounds, shot 60% from the field, and 42% from 3 on 2.5 attempts per game. Per 36 is a flawed stat, but if we just rock those numbers up a little bit, we get to 21 points a game, 11.5 rebounds, 3.9 offensive rebounds a game. Shooting volume turns up to 5 threes a game. I don't think Jalen Smith is a starting center / power forward in the NBA, but I do think he can be a very valuable bench piece and a serviceable starter if he ends up being the guy who gets the start while Nikola Vucevic is out. I think the guy is super talented offensively. He does have his limitations as a defender, and I do think that's why he didn't really see all that much burn for this team in the postseason, but he's good. He is definitely good, and for $9 million a year, that's very good. I said I wasn't going to mention re-signings, but I do want to point out that the Sixers also brought back Kelly Oubre Jr. on a 2-year, $16 million deal. $8 million a year for Kelly Oubre is really good value. I thought that he sucked after his Hornets tenure, but he kind of turned it around. He still has his CTE-esque moments here or there, but for the most part, he's cleaned up his act, and he's more of a positive than he was a negative previously. He obviously showcased the ability to be a positive player in the past, but this time this is a much better situation for him, and he does the good shit well. There's my analysis. He does the good shit well. Mason Plumlee, the Hakeem Olajuwon of Cristiano Felicios, has signed a 1-year deal with the Phoenix Suns. Great move there. In the case of, like, do you want this guy to be your starting center? No. Is he better than Drew Eubanks? Yeah, he is. And is he possibly better than what's his name? Why can't I remember? Nurkic. Is he better than Nurkic? Maybe. Possibly. At points. Sure. Jonas Valanciunas agrees to a 3-year, $30 million deal with the Washington Wizards. This move didn't make a lot of sense to people, but actually it makes complete sense to me. The Wizards have just been the land of misfit role players for the last couple of years. If you're a role player who doesn't really make sense on a contender, but you are still a role player, go to the Wizards. They'll give you money, you can put up decent stats, and then some of these good teams will stupidly convince themselves that you're actually good. Convince themselves that you're actually good because you are actually good, like Porzingis when he was there and then went to the Celtics. But yeah, Valanciunas, he just doesn't belong in the league, really. Like, he is a good NBA player for what he is. Like, he's good at what he is, but what he's good at really is not in demand anymore. Like, a slow-footed post-scoring center off of the bench, no one fucking wants that. No one really needs that. You know, if you were a good defender, if you were a good shot blocker, if you were a good floor spacer, that would be a different situation, but that's just not the reality. I actually like Valanciunas a lot. He was a player that I weirdly really liked when he was with the Raptors, but he's just a dying breed. His type of play style is a dying breed, and that's the reason why, despite the fact that he puts up good numbers, he's only getting $10 million a year. I've been saying this for a while, and weirdly, there are a lot of people pushing back on that notion. Like, nah, he's actually a good center. He's not, man. If you're a center in the NBA that cannot either A, rim protect, B, finish super well, and ideally in an athletic way, like alley-oops and such, at the rim, or C, space the floor, if you can't do any of those three things at a more than, at best, not terrible level, you're not a good rotational playoff tier center in the NBA. You're just not. I'm sorry, but that's the reality. Speaking of players that are not as relevant as they used to be, Chris Paul has signed a 1-year deal for $11 million a year. I believe this is essentially just the MLE to join the San Antonio Spurs. That's a really interesting decision. I think the logic there is A, he can get the ball into Wemby's hands, but B, he would also be a phenomenal mentor to their young guards, whether that be Trey Jones or the guy that they just drafted with the 4th pick, whose name escapes me right now. That is a good deal across the board. I think it makes sense for both parties. I appreciate that Chris Paul has kind of given up on the ring chasing thing and instead is just going to join a team where he knows he will be valuable. A little sad that he's probably going to retire without a ring, but honestly, he's at the stage of his career where it's like, if he did get a ring, is it really going to feel all that satisfying? Like, I remember Tracy McGrady was on the San Antonio Spurs in 2013, and sometimes people are like, T-Mac had his chance at a ring. You know, first time he's been out of the first round of the playoffs, he goes all the way to the finals, and then Ray Allen decides to take it from him. But really, would we be like, oh, well, T-Mac did get a ring on the 2013 Spurs? No, man. It would be sad. I am glad that Chris Paul has abandoned that because I truly do not think it will be as satisfying as it would have been. KCP to Orlando. This is probably the biggest not big move that you could conceive of because, yeah, $22 million a year, not a huge deal tier player anymore, but for the Nuggets, they were already down a body with Bruce Brown being gone. Now they're down 2, and that has bled into their perfect starting lineup. The perfect starting lineup that Denver had was their saving grace. It was like, yeah, as soon as a bench player is in, you're going to be worse. And if you have a lot of bench players in, you're going to be a lot worse. You're still going to be good. And KCP allowed for that. He was a great point of attack defender, borderline all defense this year. Really good three-point shooting. Not a high volume scorer by any capacity, but a damn solid one when he did create. It's just an L. It's just a huge L, and I'm a little afraid for the Denver Nuggets going forward because I understand you're like, it's just one role player. You can make up for that. They don't really have the assets. They haven't really been trying to. They also could have just paid KCP this money. They could have paid KCP more than this, but they decided not to. Doesn't really seem like they have a move up their sleeves. There were some rumors that they were interested in Klay Thompson, but I don't think that is an adequate replacement. Klay is definitely a higher volume and better three-point shooter, so offensively you could maybe see a boost from that, but defensively Klay Thompson's nowhere near what he used to be, and he's certainly nowhere near what KCP currently is. Also, if I didn't make it clear, Chris Paul signed with the Spurs because the Warriors waived him. That's pretty much every move that we didn't cover in the previous video. Fucking Saddiq Bey. The Hawks didn't pick up Saddiq Bey's option. That's it. Shout out to Nick for editing this video. Again, if you would check out that new main channel video when it comes out, super appreciate that. Literally the best thing you can do for me is click on that shit when it comes out. But yeah, that's it. Goodbye.